Somewhere on a rain-slicked stretch of US 40 in the autumn of 1962, a brand new truck rolled out of a Kenworth dealership and onto the American road for the first time. The driver, a freight hauler from somewhere in the San Joaquin Valley, had ordered it months ahead, put a deposit down before it even existed in final form. He didn't know it yet. Nobody did. What he was driving wasn't just a new model. It was the beginning of something that would outlast his career, outlast his children's careers, and still be rolling down American highways more than 60 years later. He had just climbed into the Kenworth W900. Long before the W900 became a symbol of everything American trucking stood for, the chrome, the long nose, the unapologetic size of it, it had to be invented. And invention, especially in the truck business of the early 1960s, was never clean or comfortable. It was a fight between accountants and engineers, and between what customers said they wanted and what the road actually demanded. Kenworth Motor Truck Company had been building serious trucks out of Seattle, Washington since 1923. By the late 1950s, they were well-regarded, well-established, and facing a serious problem. The American highway system was changing underneath their feet. Congress had passed the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956, and by the early 1960s, as the Interstate Highway System was beginning to take real shape, thousands of miles of controlled access, high-speed roadway connecting every corner of the country. That meant longer hauls, higher sustained speeds, heavier loads. The trucks that had worked fine on two-lane state roads now had to perform at 60 miles per hour for 12 hours straight. Kenworth's existing conventional models were good trucks, but the new America required something more. The engineers in Seattle understood this better than anyone. A truck that would spend its life on the interstate needed to breathe differently, run differently, and hold up against stresses that earlier designs hadn't anticipated. The cab had to give a driver visibility and comfort across distances that would have seemed impossible to a 1940s Teamster. The engine compartment had to accommodate the growing power plants that fleets were starting to demand. Cummins diesels, Detroit two-strokes, Caterpillar straight sixes, all of them bigger and more powerful than anything Kenworth had engineered around before. What emerged from that process was the W900. Introduced in 1961 and reaching full production and distribution through 1962, the truck wore its conventional long-nose layout not as a design choice, but as a functional necessity. That long hood wasn't there to look good. It was there because the engines that needed to live under it were large. And because serviceability, the ability of a driver or a shop mechanic to actually reach every component without removing half the cab, was non-negotiable in an industry where downtime cost money by the hour. See that subscribe button? It's our exchange. Your way of saying this reached me. Not about the action's size, but its meaning. Hit it if this resonated, drop a like if it moved you, and comment your thoughts on this story. Let's complete this circle together. But here is where the W900 story gets interesting. Other manufacturers were building conventional long-nose trucks in 1962. The design itself wasn't radical. What Kenworth did differently was treat proportionality as a kind of engineering language. The W900's hood-to-cab ratio, the way the fenders swept back, the placement of the headlamps, these weren't cosmetic decisions made by a styling department. They were the result of engineers and fabricators working through problems of airflow, driver sightlines, and structural rigidity, and arriving at solutions that happened to be beautiful. The hood measured approximately 122 inches from the front axle centerline to the firewall, giving it the reach that truckers would later call commanding. The cab sat upright and square, all business, with a windshield angled just enough to deflect wind without distorting the driver's view. The frame was built to handle gross vehicle weights that existing infrastructure was only beginning to accommodate. And everything about the truck communicated a single idea: this machine is serious about its work. Fleets noticed immediately. Owner-operators noticed even faster, because owner-operators are closer to their equipment than any fleet manager will ever be. They knew within the first few months on the road that the W900 tracked differently, that it held its line at highway speed with a stability that older conventionals didn't deliver, and that the engine tunnel inside the cab ran hot in summer but kept you alive in a January blizzard on the Wyoming Pass. These were real things, felt things, and word moved through the trucking community the way it always has, at truck stops, at weigh stations, over the CB radio once that technology arrived a decade later. By the mid-1960s, the W900 had established itself not just as a product, but as a reputation. The Kenworth had always been known for quality. It was a company that had never chased the low end of the market, but the W900 crystallized that reputation into a single, visible form. You could see a W900 coming down a grade from half a mile away and know exactly what it was. That kind of visual identity, earned rather than manufactured, is worth more than any advertising campaign. The truck's longevity is the hardest part of this story to fully explain, as because it defies the normal logic of industrial products. Most vehicles have a life cycle of a decade before they're replaced by something fundamentally new. The W900 has been in continuous production since its introduction, evolving through dozens of specification updates, powertrain generations, and regulatory changes, but never being replaced by something philosophically different. The reason is simple. Even if it's rarely stated plainly, the W900 got the proportions right. And not just the engineering proportions, though those were correct, but the human proportions. The relationship between the truck and the driver, the sense that this machine respects the work being done inside it. Over the decades, the W900 accumulated cultural weight that no manufacturer could have planned for. It appeared in films and television at moments when American audiences were fascinated by the trucking life. It became the truck that people who didn't drive trucks still recognized and still associated with a particular idea of American labor and American distance. The chrome that Kenworth allowed on their vehicles, not mandated but permitted and supported, became part of the truck's identity in ways that owners took seriously. An owner-operator spending weekends polishing every inch of stainless steel around that long nose was making a statement about pride in work, pride in craft, pride in the machine that carried his livelihood down the road. As none of that was in the engineering brief in 1961. The engineers were trying to build a truck that would survive high-speed interstate operation. They succeeded. Everything else came from the road, from the drivers, from 60-plus years of an idea being tested against reality and coming through intact. The W900 never had a single inventor, no lone genius who sketched it out on a napkin and changed the industry. It was a collective act of engineering at a company that had been thinking about heavy trucks for nearly 40 years when the design was finalized. That's actually more interesting than the lone genius story, because it means the W900 was the product of accumulated knowledge. Every failure and success Kenworth had ever built, distilled into one truck at exactly the moment the American highway system needed exactly that truck. Today, a new W900 rolling out of the Kenworth assembly facility still carries the proportional DNA of that 1962 original. The engines are different, the transmissions are different. The emission systems are complex enough to require their own specialists. But the long nose is still there. The upright cab is still there. The fundamental argument the W900 makes, that a serious truck should look serious, should have room under its hood for serious iron, and should give the driver something that feels worth climbing into, that argument has never been revised, because it has never been wrong. There are W900s on the road right now with more than 1 million miles on their chassis. There are owner-operators who have owned nothing else for 30 years. There are second-generation drivers who learned the trade in their father's W900 and now own their own. That kind of continuity doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone in a drafting room in Seattle in 1961 and solved a problem so thoroughly that the solution kept working long after the people who found it were gone. The W900 turned 60 years of age in production and didn't slow down. In the truck business, that's not a milestone. That's a verdict. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever had the wheel of a W900, we want to hear about it.